What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to We the People podcast. My name is Brett Maurer. And last time we left off discussing the origin myth from Greek mythology, as well as the War of the Gods and how the Olympians came to take power. And today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the period after that war. So just to give a kind of general timeline, and it's hard to come up with a timeline for Greek mythology because there have been so many different interpretations of it over the years. But the general timeline that we can follow is the one that I've been making the videos based on. So right now, we know that chaos was the starting point of everything. And from chaos, the primordial gods were formed. This included the earth. This included the underworld. And then between relationships between the earth and chaos and the underworld and chaos, we got the sky and the seas and other aspects of the world like that. Then the earth and the sky had their children, the Titans, the Cyclops, and the 100-handed creatures. There's the Titan uprising. The Titans then take control as the supreme cosmic rulers. They have children, many children. And this is a period when many minor gods, we say minor gods, but they are not, we say they're minor simply because they are not one of the 12 main Olympians. Many minor gods are born. This was considered the golden age of men. And it was a period where there were no women, for women had not yet been created. And there was no crime, no war, because that had not yet been created either among the realm of men. When these humans at the time died, they became the earth spirits, the sacred spirits of the earth. Then the prophecy is foretold that Kronos, the king of the Titans, would be overthrown by one of his children. So he eats his children as they're born. He swallows them. Rhea, Kronos' wife, hides their last-born child, and that child grows up to become Zeus. Zeus frees his siblings and overthrows the Titans in a war, and the Olympians take power. There are only 4 Olympians at the time that sit on a throne. Hades obviously does not sit on a throne because he is given the charge of the underworld. And Hestia tends to the sacred fire that is present in Mount Olympus after it is constructed. So the 4 Olympians that we have sitting on the throne currently are Poseidon, Demeter, Zeus, and Hera. And that brings us into what is called the Silver Race of men. This was a period where men, once again, there were no women at the time. They had not yet been invented. And there was no worship. Men did not give honor to the gods at this point. And that angers Zeus. Because as we know from the stories, Zeus is someone who is very prideful. And he strives for that recognition of worship. So he does kill this race of men. And this race of men becomes the tormented underworld spirits. After he kills this race of men, there comes the Bronze Age, the Bronze race of men. They are formed from ash trees. This race of men was spawned from ash trees, but they were very warlike. And this led them to basically kill each other off, and then there was none left. And then that brings us to the period I want to talk about today. So the period before the next race is created was a period when many more minor gods are born. Many of the gods have their children that they have with either other gods or with nymphs or creatures, things like that. And it's also the period when the remaining Olympians will be born. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today, was the birth of the remaining Olympians. So today we're going to talk about Hephaestus, Aphrodite. We will talk about Ares, Athena. I want to talk about Hermes, and I also want to talk about Apollo and Artemis. It's a lot to cover, and if I have enough time at the end of it, I would like to tell the story of Orion, but that may have to be a separate video. So I'm going to start off by discussing the birth of Hephaestus. And he was the god of forgery and smiths and fire. He was the son of Zeus and Hera. So once again, Hera becomes Zeus's queen, and she is a very jealous queen, we will come to learn in other stories. But he is the son of Hera and Zeus, and he's considered to be a very hard-working god, but also very caring and peace-loving. He is what we in the modern day would consider a mama's boy. He was very, very fond of his mother, and he cared for her. And he was said to be the one that could always soothe her temper with his gentle words and his care. He actually is said to have walked with a hobble and a limp, because once he was trying to calm his parents down, and he got in between Zeus and Hera during a confrontation. And so Zeus grabbed him by the legs and flung him out of Olympus. And for an entire day, he fell through the air from the top of Mount Olympus until he eventually hit the ground. So moving forward from that, Zeus did forgive him, and he was allowed to return to Olympus. But it is said that the reason flames flicker is because they move in the way that he walks. Okay, so Hephaestus has this limp from Zeus casting him out of Olympus, and because he does not walk solid and straight, neither does the flame dance. He was said to have had a large body and strong hands. And he was incredibly skilled. He was so skilled that he built 2 robots out of gold and silver he took from the earth in order to help him walk, because his legs were so weak from this incident he could not hold himself up for very long. He was such a skilled craftsman, he created these robots, and they had mechanical brains and mechanical bodies and hearts and everything, and they could even think for themselves. They could speak, they had tongues and teeth. They were literal people made out of metal. Basically, the Greek mythology version of the Terminator, but they're not trying to hurt anyone. And they also helped as basically his assistants in his workshop on Olympus. He is the one who created the 12 golden thrones that all of the Olympians would sit on. He forged all of their weapons for them. He forged their chariots, jewelry, everything. His main helpers were the Cyclops, because once again, they were great craftsmen of the Titans, and they formed all of the weapons and things that the Titans needed. And so when the Olympians took over, they joined with Hephaestus and basically became the blacksmiths of Olympus. He also had forges not only on Olympus, but inside all of the volcanoes across the earth. And when they would swing their hammers, when he and the Cyclops would swing their hammers and forge the metal and stoke the fires, it is said that that is when sparks would burst out of the tops of these mountains. And that is how they explained many different volcanic occurrences. All of the Olympian gods were very fond of the work that he did, and even would come down and visit his forge just to admire the work he was doing. Eventually, after she is created, he would become the husband to Aphrodite. And Aphrodite would come regularly to his workshop to look at the beautiful jewelry and weapons and things that he would form with the Cyclops. And he made sure that she was always decorated in these beautiful gems and forging beautiful decorations for her. Now, with that, I want to talk about the creation of Aphrodite. And now there's a couple different stories surrounding this. And the one that I've always found myself to not necessarily agree with, but the one that when I've read about it always felt right to me, is the one that I'm going to tell you about now. So after the war with the Titans, after the Titans fought their war with Uranus, who was the deity of the sky and the cosmos, the starry night sky and the cosmos. Parts of him fell to Earth after being cut off and things like that in the battle between him and his son Cronus. And it is said that the parts of him that fell into the sea became patches of sea foam. And one of these patches of sea foam became Aphrodite. Aphrodite, for those who don't know, was the goddess of love, and she was said to be a sight to behold. Her beauty rivaled only that of Hera, and Hera and Aphrodite were said to be the goddesses of beauty and the most beautiful gods. Aphrodite in this story is the only Olympian who had neither a father or a mother, because she spawned simply from sea foam. The west wind had first seen her. Once again, the cardinal directions were given deities. And this is not just for Greek mythology, but for all different mythologies and religions. The cardinal directions were originally given either creatures that represented them or deities that represented them. And in the case of Greek mythology, we have the four winds. The west wind is the one that found her first, as she formed on this sea foam. And she simply floated on the waves out in the sea. And it is said that she was so lovely to behold that the wind itself almost lost its breath. And so with a little bit of breeze, he blew her to an island. And this island was named Cythera. After she washed ashore, the three Graces welcomed her ashore. So once again, these were the goddesses of beauty. The three Graces were the personification of aspects of beauty. There they dressed her with beautiful clothing and sparkling jewelry and ornate decorations for her hair and her body. And they also gave her a golden chariot that was drawn by white doves. After she was dressed and prepared, they led her to the gates of Olympus. And all of the gods there, seated on their golden thrones, rejoiced in her beauty. And she was thus welcomed as a goddess. And she was given a throne of herself. Zeus, although, was afraid that the gods would fight over her. And so to prevent this, he basically arranged a marriage. And he gave her hand in marriage to the calm, patient, loving Hephaestus. And this god, this god who is said to be, a short, stocky, didn't walk well, bearded, long hair covered in soot craftsman, could not believe his luck, because he could not believe that someone as, rough around the edges and calloused as he was, could be blessed with something so beautiful. And so it is then that he put all of his skill and focus into adorning her with beautiful jewelry and gemstones and things. It is said that he made her a girdle that was so finely made of gold that he was able to even weave magic into the filigree work. It was not very smart of him, according to the story, because when she wore it, no one could resist her. And, she is the goddess of love. Okay, so that made her, to begin with, almost irresistible. And then when she puts this magic girdle on, she becomes basically deathly beautiful. Now, they're moving on from that. They ended up having children. And one of the children that they had, everyone in the modern day will know as Cupid. But the name that he goes by in Greek mythology is Eros. So Aphrodite had a son who was very mischievous, and his name was Eros. And he would go around with his bow and his quiver of love arrows, and he would shoot them into the hearts of basically the mortals that would populate the earth during this time, the few mortals that there were. And I just want to point out, we are talking about a period when the minor gods, the rest of the minor gods are born, and the Olympians, but this is also a period when some demigods are born, and even when Zeus takes a few of his early brides. And so Eros would basically go around and cause mischief, because he would cause these people to fall in love and basically go head over heels for each other. Once a year, it is said, Aphrodite would return to the island where she washed up and dive into the sea. And she would once again have her beauty renewed. And she would dive in and rise from the water almost as fresh as she was the day that she spawned from the sea foam. And though she loved the glamour and beauty and things and the admiration that was given to her, she was not necessarily pleased with being the wife of Hephaestus, because he was a dirty, sooty, calloused, man, or god rather. And it is said that she would have much rather been the wife of the very hot-headed, fierce god Ares, who I would like to talk about next. So, I personally have never heard an origin story for Ares. I'm not sure how he came into being or anything like that. But I at least know about basically his family. So Ares was the god of war. And according to the legends, he was said to be extremely handsome, very tall, very rugged, but that was counterbalanced because he was full of vain and cruelty, and he enjoyed bloodshed and things like that. He took the wife Eris. Eris was the spirit of strife, and she was basically the perfect companion for Ares. Eris was very sinister, plotting, and her favorite thing to do was to take her special tool, which was this golden apple, and it has been come to be known as the golden apple of discord, and she would throw it. And basically when she threw it, it would drive civilizations and friends and families against each other. And war would break out everywhere the apple was thrown. And of course, Ares thrived in that. He was the god of war. He loved the fighting and the bloodshed. And so when he would hear this clashing of swords and shields and the sound of blood being spilled, it is said that he would go into this happy panic almost, and he would dress himself in his battle armor and jump into his chariot and ride into battle. He didn't care who won or who lost. He wasn't playing sides. He just wanted to be involved in the bloodshed. And with that came more spirits. And the spirits that joined him, so obviously you have Ares and his partner in crime, Eris, and eventually they gained followers. And these followers were pain, panic, famine, and oblivion. And once again, these were more spirits, and they would follow Ares into war and basically control the battlefield, bringing pain to those who were injured and just mass chaos and panic, and obviously famine many times in war during the ancient times would follow. And of course, oblivion. Now, every so often, Ares himself would be harmed. And it is said that even though he was immortal, he could still suffer from pain. And he could still suffer from illness and things. And it's said that sometimes when he was wounded, he would scream so loud that it would be heard across the globe. He would run home to Olympus and, cry and beg for the pain to go away. And Zeus would basically just tell him, that he should stop his howling and that he was the worst child and things like that. And then, his wounds would be treated. He would consume ambrosia and nectar, or, be treated with medicines of the gods. And then he would sit on his throne and act as if nothing happened. And he was so handsome and rugged that Aphrodite just fell head over heels for him. But she was the only god or goddess that was said to enjoy Ares. Ares was a very despised god, and no one despised him more than the goddess Aphrodite. And that is, once again, who I would like to talk about next. And the birth of Aphrodite is one of my favorite stories. Of Athena. I apologize. I meant to say Athena, not Aphrodite. She basically came out of Zeus's skull as a full-grown woman. And this is one of my favorite stories to talk about. So I want to make sure I do it right as I'm grabbing my notes here. So Athena was the goddess of wisdom and battle strategy. It is said that though Ares may be on the battlefield, those that sided with Athena would be victorious because she would bring them the things that they needed to succeed. Her mother was Metis. Metis was a goddess of prudence that was one of these minor gods born from the time of the Titans. She was the first wife of Zeus. And this was his wife before he even took Hera as a bride. And so he depended greatly on her because she was his wise counsel. And this was also the person that would give him advice during the time when the Olympians, when Zeus planned to free the Olympians and fight the Titans. Now, Mother Earth, being the cunning woman that she was, warned Zeus that if Metis gave birth to a son, this son would do what Zeus had done to Cronus and would dethrone him, would vanquish him. And Zeus, being the man in charge that he was, decided he couldn't let this happen. But the issue was he still needed her advice. So he basically challenged Metis to a shape-shifting game because many of the gods were able to take the form of animals and things like that. And so Metis, forgetting her prudence, agreed to play this game and would turn herself into all different types of animals. Big animals, small animals, ferocious. And Zeus, as the story goes, convinced her to turn into a fly. Basically saying, I bet you can't become anything smaller. Bet you can't get anything smaller. And so, finally, she turns into a fly, and Zeus takes a deep breath and sucks her in. He swallows her. And from then after, because she was immortal, Metis simply sat inside of his head and became his conscience, became his powerful, all-knowing voice in the back of his head. Now, the issue was, let's not forget that Metis was pregnant. And so she would sit inside of Zeus's head, fashioning armor and clothing for this child that she soon would bear. And basically, she would forge this armor inside of Zeus's skull. And so she would sit inside of Zeus's skull and hammer and bang on this metal and these things that she was using to make supplies for the child. Soon after all this began, then Zeus started to suffer from terrible headaches, and he would cry out in agony, and he cried out in agony so much that terrible lightning storms and things plagued the world. So all of the gods, fearing what would happen, called for Hephaestus to bring his tools and open up Zeus's skull. And so that's what they did, and they opened Zeus's skull, and out sprang Athena, completely dressed in her robe and armor and helmet, with her gray eyes piercing all of the gods. And all of the gods stood in awe. And she, from then forth, became one of Zeus's favorite children. And that is going to lead me to my next story. Because I want to talk about Zeus's actual favorite child. And I have other stories about Athena and things like that, but we will get to those later. So the story I want to tell now has to do with the goddess that would actually become Zeus's favorite. And this was Artemis. Now, Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. And on an island that Poseidon had raised out of the sea, there was nothing that grew. And the way the story goes is there was this single palm tree. And under this palm tree is where Apollo and Artemis were born. Zeus had married the goddess Leto. Now, this was after Hera had married Zeus. And Hera found out that Leto was expecting twins. And so, Hera, being who she is, went into this fit of rage and ordered that all the lands in the world refuse the goddess Leto any shelter. And so basically she was chased away from all of the lands across Mother Earth. And Leto was forced to wander from place to place and basically hold her children in. She wasn't allowed to rest and give birth. So finally, Poseidon raised an island from the sea, and this island became Delos. And Leto found Delos, and the island welcomed her because it was newly formed, and it wasn't floating necessarily on land, but it was its own mass in the sea. And so it was free from following Hera's bidding. Exhausted as she was from carrying the twins, she sat down beneath the shade of its palm tree and gave birth. Now, the problem was she couldn't give birth at first. Hera would not allow the goddess of childbirth, and I've never quite known how to say her name, but I will take a shot at it. Ilithia, the goddess of childbirth, Hera would not let her go to Leto and would not let her deliver the children. And without her help, children could not be born. And so all of the other goddesses felt sorry for Leto. And they brought offerings to Hera and jewelry and beautiful flowers and incense and clothing to try and convince her to let Leto have these children. And that was when the other goddesses made an offering of a beautiful necklace, and it was said that this necklace was almost 9 yards long and fashioned from beautiful gold and amber that Hephaestus himself fashioned in his forge. And it is said that it was so beautiful that Hera could not resist it. And so then she went and let Ilithia go to Leto. And in order to get there quickly, the messenger of the gods, Iris, walked her down her beautiful rainbow bridge so that she could deliver the children of Leto. Leto's first child was the daughter, Artemis, who, for those who don't know, became the goddess of the hunt and newborn creatures. And she was also touched by the moon's magic. She herself was not the moon, but she was blessed by its magic. And so it is said that because of that, she was as beautiful as the moon itself, and her hair was dark and her skin was pale and glowed against her dark hair. And after she was born, then Apollo was brought into the world, and it is said that he was shining like the sun. And though he himself was not the sun, he was blessed by its magic. And so he became the god of music and light. And he also became what is the god of reason. And he would bring, rationale and negotiation and things into the world of man. These twins gave Zeus such joy, and he was just brought to his knees by this, because here were his two children that were touched by the two, probably two of the most important deities to the world, the sun and the moon, that brought about the tides and worked so diligently with the Olympian gods. And here his own two children were blessed with their beauty and with their power. And so, as a gift, Zeus gave each of them a beautiful silver bow and a quiver of arrows. The arrows that Artemis possessed were said to be soft as moonbeams, but would bring painless death, as she was the goddess of the hunt, and no creatures would be harmed under her watch. But Apollo's were burning and hard and piercing, much like the sun's rays. And the two of them were the balance with each other. They were the yin and the yang. Zeus then blessed this little island that Poseidon had raised from the sea, and he fastened it to the bottom, making it permanent. And on then this island, grass and flowers began to grow. And then Delos became one of the richest islands in Greece. Pilgrims of the age of men and the world of men would flock to it and basically covered it with temples and treasures in order to honor Apollo, Artemis, and their mother Leto. So then I want to talk about, like I said, Artemis. And just the story about Artemis that has always been one of my favorite. Artemis, as a newborn, went to her father and asked him to grant her a wish. And she told him that she wanted to remain as young and wild as the woods and its creatures. And that she asked him that she never marry. And Zeus being the father that he is. I don't think there are many fathers that want their newborn daughters to come to them and say, I want to get married. He agreed to this and told her her wish was granted. She would never be forced to marry. She would remain young forever and be allowed to hunt throughout the woods and things like that. And he also gave her another gift, and this was a pack of nymphs. And these nymphs became her companions. He also gave her a pack of hunting hounds, and they became basically her herd. And together with the nymphs and the hounds, she went about hunting the woods of the earth and caring for the creatures in the woods. And, you know, that gives explanation as to, it's always said that the nymphs were the whispers in the trees and, the things like that. And Zeus giving these dogs to Artemis explains how we got hunting dogs, And so then, as she got older and became the incredible hunter that she's said to be, she caught 4 deer, or elk, or, whatever breed of deer there are in Greece. And these were said to be special deer of some nature, and they had golden glowing antlers. And they would pull her in her silver chariot that glistened with the light of the moon. And it is said when the moon cast its light over the hills and the woods, Artemis would then hunt with her nymphs and her hounds, and after a wild hunt, she would bathe in a pond or a spring, and be once again reborn with this beauty and her never-changing youth. Well, my favorite story that follows this is the story of a mortal group of hunters that had the audacity to look upon her while she was bathing. So one night, and it was by accident, a young hunter came across this pool in the woods. And in this pool, Artemis and her nymphs, her group of nymphs, were all bathing. And instead of turning around and running for his life, he stood there spellbound, completely shocked at the beauty of this pale, glowing pale, growing goddess, with black, shimmering hair. And he was just completely stunned. Artemis sees him, and she is furious. She turns and sees him and loses it. And the nymphs, in a panic, begin to dress her. And the goddess was so angry that she took water from the pool and she flung it all over the hunter. And immediately after having this water thrown all over him, he began to change. He sprouted antlers and grew fur, and his hands were replaced with hooves, and he became a stag. And in that moment, his own hunting dogs, the hunter's hunting dogs, began to charge him. And he could not utter human words or sound to call them off because he had been turned into a stag. And these dogs killed him. They destroyed him, never knowing that he was their master. And it is said that Artemis, at that moment, uttered, "No mortal shall live to boast that he had seen Artemis bathing." And she was dressed, she picked up her bow and arrows, and went on hunting with her nymphs. And from then forth, she was known to be a cold and pitiless goddess. Even though she was this stoic, beautiful sight that cared for the animals and sought that they have no pain, she did not feel that remorse for mortals because she felt that they too were beastly creatures. And so it was then that she became a cold and pitiless goddess, according to mortals. And there are, so many other stories about what the gods do to each other. But it's just, there's so much. That would have to be different episodes. So then moving on, Apollo was born, and I will tell everyone a story about Apollo in another video. But the next god that was born at the time that I want to discuss is Hermes. Now, Hermes, my God, he was a god of many things. And he is said to be the merriest of the Olympians, but also one of the trickiest. He was the god of shepherds. He was the god of the herds. He was the god of thieves and merchants and travelers. He was the god of wit. He was just so much. He really was. And so his mother, once again, one of Zeus's wives, was Maya. She was a Titan, and she lived in a cave that was so deep that Hera never knew that she was one of Zeus's wives. And so when Zeus and Maya conceived a child, Hermes, he was born in peace. He was very precocious as a child, it is said, and his mother hardly wrapped him and put him in a basket before he began to think of mischief and the things, that he could do and get away with. He would wait till she fell asleep, and then he would crawl out of his wrappings and leave the cave. And it's said that he would go into the pastures where Apollo kept his beautiful sacred white cows. And Apollo would be so distracted by music and other things that he felt were more important that he wouldn't notice that Hermes would steal his cows. And as the story goes, Hermes stole the 50 best cows from Apollo's herd. And to keep Apollo from knowing who had stolen his herd, Hermes wrapped the cows' hooves with tree bark. And basically this disguised their footprints. And he tied broom bristles to the cows' tails, and so as they walked, they would brush the footprints away. As they walked and their tails swing, they would simply erase the footprints. And it said that he even went to confuse Apollo further, that he would take the cows down backward out of the pasture, and he would tie bundles of branches to his own feet. And by doing this, it would look as if a giant had led them out of the pasture. Because no child or human could have feet that small. And, afterwards he would hurry home, having hid these stolen cows, and some of them he would sacrifice. And this was before he even himself was a god. He would sacrifice some to the gods that already sat on thrones, and then he would sacrifice to himself, calling himself the 12th Olympian god. He would take the entrails of the cow and make strings of them, and then he would string them across branches and turtle shells and things and make lyres. And he would sit and play and pluck these strings and make beautiful music. And he would hide the lyre under his arm and sneak back into the cave, and he would pretend to be asleep. And as the story goes, he pretended to be asleep, and when his mother woke up, she knew what had happened. She knew what he had done. And she would be enraged with him. And he would simply play her music and lullaby her back to sleep. Now, as the story between Hermes and Apollo goes, it said that eventually, after noticing the cows were gone, Apollo would storm into this cave, and basically question him. Why would you take my cows? What's wrong with you? And Hermes, being a mischievous little child that he was, would simply say, I didn't steal your cows. I'm a newborn child. I don't know what a cow looks like. Maybe you just lost them. And so that made Apollo so mad that he chased this child out of the cave and all the way up to the temple of Olympus. And basically, he tried to plead his case to the gods about Hermes stealing these cows, and all the gods laughed at him. And then it was that Zeus, was so baffled by this, and he tried not to show any emotion to it, but he couldn't help but laugh. And he was so proud of his small son, for having so cunningly gotten these cows. So, finally Zeus goes, okay, where are the cows? Show him where the cows are. And so Hermes takes him down to the woods where he's hidden the cows. And after giving them back, Apollo says, okay, we're good. There's, you returned to the cows now. There's no need for me to be angry with you anymore. But that was when Apollo decided, I should probably count these cows. And he figured out that 2 of them were missing and once again went into rage. And so then Hermes began to play him a tune. And this music to Apollo was breathtaking and it was calming. And he fell in love with the sound that was coming from this instrument. And as the god of music, having never seen this instrument before and the beautiful sound that came from it, he offered Hermes his entire herd in exchange for the instrument. And so Hermes bargained with him and negotiated. Apollo had to give him his magic wand. So out of this deal, Hermes gets a magic wand and a herd, and he becomes the god of herds. And thus Apollo is given this new instrument that he created. And from that moment on, it is said that the two gods were the best of brothers and the best of friends. And even though Hermes was the god of thieves, it is said after that he never stole again. It is said he never told a lie after that, even though he didn't always tell the whole truth. And that is where telling a white lie originates in the Greek mythology. And as a mother of now one of the 12 Olympians, Maya, his mother, was allowed to come from the cave and reside in Olympus with him. And Zeus was so delighted with the wit and cunning of Hermes that he made him herald of the gods. So when I tell you Hermes had so many jobs, oh my goodness, he was literally a jack of all trades. As a gift, Zeus gave him a golden hat that adorned a pair of beautiful white wings. And he also gave him a pair of shoes that adored white wings that would help him to fly and move swiftly. He also gave him a magic cape, and under this cape, Hermes could hide all of his magic tricks. And it is said that, he became one of the fastest creatures, one of the fastest beings in the universe. He could move from place to place so quickly, if you blinked, you missed him. He brought quick wit and flighting words to merchants and negotiators and politicians. And he became so popular among the mortals. Oh my gosh. He was so popular among the mortals, they just loved him. And even Hera, who was said to be so harsh and spiteful, truly fell in love with him. She'd been so angry with him at one point because he killed one of her greatest servants. And after that, she demanded that he be punished. And basically, each god on this trial was given a vote, given a pebble, and this had their name on it. And they were told, throw it at the feet of who you think should win the case. If you throw it at Hera's feet, then she wins, and Hermes would be punished or put to death or something like that. And if you gave it to Hermes, then the case would be withdrawn. And Hermes made such a great case and spoke on behalf of himself that after it was all over, the gods applauded him and gave him their votes. And it said that he got so many votes, he was completely buried under a mountain of pebbles. And that was when travelers decided to pile up stones on the sides of the roads. And with doing that, mortals believed that Hermes would stand inside of these piles of stones and help them find their way if they were ever lost. And once again, this is how Hermes became the god of travelers, because travelers who were lost and seeking advice would pile these stones up thinking Hermes could speak to them. And with that, he also became the guiding god. And what that means is he would take those souls that were lost and wandering and guide them down to the underworld. He would lead them himself down to the underworld to be placed in whatever realm it was that they belonged. And I'm checking my list because I think I've covered everybody at this point. Oh, there's one more. So the one person that I have not covered yet, she herself does not sit on her own throne in Olympus. But she is an extremely important goddess, and that is Persephone. Persephone was this joyous, jubilant, beautiful woman. She was the daughter of Demeter, who was the goddess of the harvest and of basically growing. She was the goddess that brought green and beauty and life into the world. And she was compared to the summer. And she was the summer when things would grow bountiful and beautiful, and the fall when things would, reach their time to be harvested and used. But Persephone was said to be the spring. She was young and beautiful and vibrant and just joyous. And when Demeter sat on her golden throne, her daughter would always sit on her lap. And when she went down to earth to look over the trees and the fields and the flowers and the crops, Persephone would go with her. And wherever Persephone danced, flowers would spring up. And she was so lovely and beautiful and joyous that she caught the eye of the person that was the exact opposite. Very dark and gloomy and despairful, and that was Hades. And Hades fell in love with her. It was over for him. He wanted her to be queen of the underworld, but he knew that her mother would never let that happen. And that's where I'm going to stop for today. So there are a lot of stories, and there are still some, minor gods that I at least want to mention. And there's so many stories about the gods that I want to tell. There's the story of Hera and Io, and basically how the peacock came to be in being. There's the story of Athena and Arachne. There's the story of Poseidon and some of his children, including Orion, the hunter. And there's just so many. I cannot begin to explain to you guys how many stories there are if you just look into and try to study Greek myth a little bit. There's so much. And Norse mythology is, I would push to say, almost double. Simply because they had so many gods and goddesses and minor gods and goddesses and monsters. So there's definitely going to be a lot more videos coming out. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. I do at some point plan on getting out another history podcast. That one is going to cover a figure for Black History Month. I just can't seem to decide on who I want to talk about. So I'm hopefully going to make a decision on that soon, or I may even put a poll out and see what everybody thinks about that. So like always, make sure you check out our other videos. There's a politics section, a history section, and of course now there's the mythology section. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment, tell me what you guys think. Share it on social media so other people can tell me what they think. As much feedback as possible is always helpful. So everybody, stay safe, stay healthy wherever you're at. enjoy the rest of your weeks or weekends, wherever you're at, and I will see everybody next time.